The following is brought to you by Total Seal Piston Rings, the leader in ring seal technology. TotalSeal.com. Hello and welcome back to another edition of Hidden Horsepower presented by Total Seal. My name is Joe Costello and I am super excited for another episode. Thank you so much, podcast listeners, and everybody out there who has been writing reviews and giving us 5 stars, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud, and of course the TotalSeal.com website. Can't go any further without bringing on my co-host, Mr. Keith Jones from Total Seal. Keith, welcome. How are you?
I'm doing great, Joe, and thank you for, we'll say, having me back again. Here we are, another great day, sun shining. I think we're looking at 116 coming up here pretty quick in Arizona. Welcome to the heat.
Yikes, exactly. It's summertime. How are things at Total Seal? Are you busy?
Oh, we're swamped. We're buried. It's unbelievable how busy it is. I mean, yeah, I can't speak for all businesses because there's a lot of companies and a lot of places that suffered and a lot of people that lost their jobs. But the automotive world, the performance world, because everybody had time on their hands, dove into all their projects, and it just kind of blew this industry up. And racing suffered. A lot of racing stopped, but then the racing is coming back and has come back. So we've added all the street enthusiasts and truck enthusiasts, off-road enthusiasts, and now the racing guys are back. And yeah, it's an exciting time. I've never seen it this busy, and I don't want to date myself, but I've been doing this a long time.
Exactly, and I can tell you that my NHRA drag racing stuff is coming back. So much is coming back. It's a very exciting time. Now, on this particular episode, we're going to do something a little bit differently. We've done marine and drag racing and dirt track and round track and NASCAR and classic NASCAR. One thing we haven't delved into just yet, and we're going to do it right here today, is a little something for the diesel guys. How experienced are you in that area?
Me personally, I know how to put the key in, turn it, wait for the glow plug light to go off. That shows you how dated I am, and light her up.
Light her up, which brings us to Choate Engineering Performance and Cass Choate, who has been part of our engine performance expos, and I have worked with him in the past, and he is going to guide us on a conversation talking about diesel horsepower. Let's bring him into the show right now. Cass, welcome to the show. Welcome to Hidden Horsepower.
Hey, guys. Thanks so much for having me on. It's a huge privilege to be asked to be on the show, so thank you very much.
Well, not only that, you're going to be educating me, definitely, and sounds like Keith, given his reference to the glow plug, maybe him too.
Well, I think diesels are the mystical part of the internal combustion engine family. I think a lot of people are terrified of them because, it's not the 350 Chevrolet that their dad and they grew up on. So it's not as scary as all that.
Well, you're going to be the guy in charge, and we're going to pepper you with some questions, of course, about, how it all works. But I guess let's start off there, and I would imagine our listeners to this podcast are going to be people who really want to delve deeply into what you know. I know you've got extensive knowledge, and what you guys have been doing over there at Choate Engineering Performance is just trying to improve everything that exists. From what I know, like whatever there is, you're making it better.
Yeah, that's definitely our niche in the industry. We, a lot of diesel owners out there are really happy with what performance upgrades they can get through a tuner and taking a truck that may have been 360 horsepower, 375 horsepower from the factory, and bumping it up another 100 horse and being in that sweet spot right there. That's kind of where most of the market is. Everybody that has a diesel truck pretty much has a tuner on it. It's just kind of synonymous when you get a truck because there's so much power that can be added on a diesel simply from a tuner. So it's not so much the power that the guys are after at that point. When they come to us, there is a lot of guys there that are wanting to know what bolt-on parts that can make it better, what internal components. But one of the main things is what can we do to make this thing last? Because it makes great power, especially with a tuner, maybe an exhaust, whatever it might be. But what can we do to actually fix the inherent problems of the manufactured engine? So we really revolve around focusing on the insufficiencies of the engines per whatever manufacturer it is.
And exactly, you're not really related to any specific manufacturer. You work with all, which sounds great.
Right.
Keith?
Yeah, we go Ford, Chevrolet, Dodge, Duramax, Power Stroke, Cummins, and we're starting to get more into the lighter duty market and some of the smaller diesels as well.
What would you say some of the misconceptions are? You mentioned it's not your father's 350. I certainly know that experience, but I'm out there on the streets. I do street drags at Homestead Miami Speedway. Some of the fastest vehicles we have are these giant four-wheel drive trucks you're talking about. They're diesel powered. They got great traction. They never turn a tire, but they run. They're fast, and people love them. So it seems like the fun market for diesel is coming on strong right now. What would you say are some of the misconceptions or maybe old conceptions of diesel?
I think you hit the nail on the head. I mean, if you go to SEMA, of course, last year nobody went anywhere, but if you went the year before that, what was LS Fest is now, not that that's any less, but it's definitely six-door diesel trucks or lifted trucks, diesel, everything. So this market's really came on strong, and I think the reason for a lot of that is just as you said, the common misconception of diesel. Who would want in their right mind one of the old Oldsmobile, diesel engines or the 6.2 liters? Albeit they are dependable. As far as performance is concerned, they were loud. They had poor acceleration. They were smoky. They didn't like to start in the cold. They were temperamental if your fuel gelled. There was just so many reasons not to own a diesel. And because the truth be known is in the old days, they really didn't make any more power per se as far as the towing niche market as what you might find in a big block. If somebody had given me the choice between a 6.2 liter and a 454, honestly, yeah, if I'm going to be towing with a lot, I'll probably go with a gasser every time. But nowadays it's totally different. The technology for diesel has completely changed to what it was. They're much quieter through multi-tin injection. They are much more efficient. They burn cleaner through the upgraded glow plug technology that came out recently in the last 5 to 7 years. Instead of the old days of freezing your can off, waiting for the thing, wait to start kind of light. You're sitting there and you're rubbing your hands together, just waiting for the light to go off. Now it happens in 3 seconds and it's ready to start. Your acceleration due to variable geometry turbos, dual sequential turbos, single sequential turbos. There's so many different things, higher injection pressures for, like we said, for cleaner and the injection timing so that they're quiet now as you can imagine. You can now go through the drive-through without having to turn your vehicle off, and you can tow 20,000 pounds and it doesn't downshift when it hits a grade. Oh, and also let me add, it gets a lot better fuel mileage. Oh, and it lasts longer too. And it drives and it'll outrun most with a tune and it's set up. I mean, it's competitive straight across the board. So why wouldn't you want a diesel? I know the initial price and investment, but there's so many reasons now and so many things out there now. It's just, that's the reason why the industry, I'll tell you this, something I was reading the other day, 28% growth in sales last year when everything else was going down.
Wow.
Diesel went up 28%.
Amazing. I'm sold. Keith, jump in here with a question.
Well, Cass, what do you think we've like you said, I love how you touched on, this evolution/revolution, because I go back to the days, back in the late 70s, early 80s, I worked at a GMC truck dealership here. And, I remember what an 871 Detroit sounds like. And having that under the hood of your pickup's probably not good. Some people may dig it, but it's like, wow, that's a little noisy. I'm very impressed with how quiet they are today. You don't see, we'll say the ominous cloud behind it every time they take off. The technology, how that's evolved. What do you think that some of your biggest gains that you've seen, with projects you've tackled. I see some of the articles you've done on 6.4s, 6.7s. Things that's like, hey, this is great in a stock vehicle, but when we're cranking it up to 1,000 foot-pounds, this is deficient. What do you think one of your biggest challenges and your we'll say your solve for that? Let us know what you think of that or what that is.
Sure. Well, the interesting thing about it is that every platform has its own challenge, and there's certain areas where I don't really worry about a block blowing up at 1,200 horsepower from a Duramax. There's, as long as we've got a good bottom end. However, some of the 6.7 stuff on the Cummins side, seeing some of the castings separate at that point in time without a deck plate engine, that starts to be a concern. So it's funny because every one of them have their own characteristics and their own problems. So, as far as when you're cranking it up, and you're making a lot more horsepower, anything from 6 liter that doesn't obviously have insufficiencies with the head bolt design, and we start lifting heads where we're cutting O-rings in the cylinder heads and using that for, a common fix for O-ring cylinder heads and upgraded maybe head gaskets and ARP studs and things like that, which is a very basic fix that, it's a very effective fix, but it's not like we're having to go out in left field and, deck plate an engine to make big power. But as it grows and it progresses through that, whereas it might be 11 to 16, 6.7 Power Stroke that came out with an extremely inefficient or insufficient connecting rod that just will not hold the power much past 550, 600 horsepower, and they're gone. Maybe even less than that. So every one of them has their little nuance, and a lot of the things that straight across the board, not to kind of put a plug in here, but it's just the truth, I have to say. The biggest things that we fight, especially when you're making, and this is now, I'm looking for common denominators in the question that you asked. The common denominator is fuel. Okay, if we're going to get to 1,000 foot-pound of torque, if we're going to get to more horsepower, we're obviously the equation mandates that we're going to have to add more fuel and more air. So the common denominator of all that across, no matter what platform it is fuel. So the biggest thing that we combat is keeping the fuel out of the oil. And I think that is absolutely key. It doesn't matter if you're a Ford guy. It doesn't matter if you're a Chevrolet guy. It doesn't matter if you're, a Ram, Dodge, Chrysler guy. It doesn't matter because it is going to affect everyone, and that's obviously ring sealing. And Total Seal does a fantastic job with their one-piece ring. We've had great success with that. Even on a stock application, on some of the earlier, like the 6.4 models and things like that, we've got one bus company. And I don't mean to go back because I know we're talking about high horsepower here. But, we have a bus company that we work with in Georgia, and they have, they were Cummins swapping all these Max 4.7 engines out left and right, and they couldn't keep them going. We put together a package, including, the one-piece ring from Total Seal, and a certain procedure that we do, obviously torque plate honing, but not just torque plate honing, but also making sure that we have emulated the distortion of the bore through testing what the torque specs should be, not just grabbing and saying, okay, ARP calls for 260 foot-pound of torque or whatever it is, and torquing them all down the same. What we're trying to do is emulate that cylinder bore to be able to replicate it once the cylinder head's down, so that we can have the absolute best ring seal that we possibly can to keep the fuel out of the oil. So I'm sorry, that's a long-winded question or answer to that question, but maybe that kind of gives some insight.
No, I'll jump in. No, that's perfect, Cass. I really appreciate that, because that is the thing that I see, and it's just not the performance applications; it's the everyday application. The fuel dilution in the diesel, it's got a lot of it. And you start introducing more fuel, as you just stated, really cranking it up, and the fuel dilution's a absolute disaster in there. It just kills the oil film. So as you were talking about getting the bores straightened around, getting the bore finishes correct, because as that amount of fuel goes up, we've got to get more oil retention on the bores, and then keeping the fuel out of the oil. That's the biggest thing that I see. The guys that call me, working on these, trying to improve them, it's always about trying to keep that fuel out of the oil. I think that's such a critical thing to get, to do in these. Another thing that I battle, and hopefully, some listeners, I said readers, will hear this. A lot of the diesels use, or I should say the most of them use a Keystone style top ring. And for those of you that aren't familiar with it, look at your top ring when you've got it apart. It's shaped like a wedge. So the interesting thing, we're increasing horsepower, we're increasing piston to wall clearance, and we're also, when we do that, the ring is coming farther out of the ring groove. So if you look at the shape of the groove compared to, say, a rectangular ring that would be in an automotive application, as the ring comes out of the land in an automotive application with a rectangular piece, the up and down, the vertical clearance does not change. Enter the Keystone ring. As we increase the piston to wall, we're pulling the ring further out of the groove. We now have more clearance in land, more up and down clearance. And this is one of the root causes of people, quote unquote, burning out the ring groove, torching out the ring groove, is they've created enough clearance in that land now that the flame front will actually go around the ring groove and burn that out. So that has to be addressed in the big horsepower engines as well. Just wanted to point that out and bring that up. That's something that's really important to pay attention to if you're increasing the piston to wall clearance on these engines.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, and it only gets worse when you start adding. I say it gets worse when you add big injectors, but it also gets worse when you're too small of an injector and you're trying to get as much power as you can, because you start spraying way earlier to try to unload the fuel out of that injector, and you wind up spraying longer to try to get it unloaded. So now we're not hitting the combustion bowl like what we once were. Our target has become a lot larger than what it was when we were actually using this injector to flow this amount of CC to be able to burn out the combustion bowl. So it only gets even worse, because the further out we go, now we're getting away from that combustion bowl that's actually forcing that oxygen back to the center of the cylinder, where it begins to create even more havoc for that ring.
I'm glad you pointed that out, because I was going to ask you about that again. Not being a diesel expert and understanding how important that combustion bowl is. So in essence, you're kind of saying, hey, maybe bigger injector, keep it sprayed where it needs to be. It sounds like maybe that's the way to go.
Everything, as you very well know, is application. And it just depends on what the application. So people ask you. I know how that goes. People ask you that question every day, and they want to say, should I go with this or should I go with that? And you go, yes. And they look at you like, what? And it's like, it all depends. Depending on where you're at, a bigger injector can actually lower your EGTs. Absolutely. The reason why is because after the party has already happened, the heat, the auto ignition temperature of diesel fuel is 430 degrees. So we need that just to get the thing to ignite. But as we start going through the travel of the piston, after it's passed over top dead center, there's a certain point when the heat begins to, because of the thermal expansion, the heat begins to dissipate rapidly through that cylinder. But if we keep spraying in attempt, we can actually just cause our EGTs to get hotter by adding fuel, but we're not actually adding any power. So we get smoky, and we start seeing higher EGTs. So a better choice would be, let's get a bigger injector. Let's not spray for as long, and we can unload it a lot more quickly. Application is everything.
It sounds like something I hear on the Hidden Horsepower podcast very often, like, make your first call to us and tell us what you're trying to do with your stuff before you build it. That way we can help you. Doesn't it sound familiar, Keith?
Oh, yeah, all day. And I'm sure Cass gets them all the time. We like to use the phrase, hey, make us your first call, not your last, because it's way easier to stop the problem before it starts.
Yeah, it is. And, it's not I'm more inclined for those that have purchased engines from us to make this the first call. The guy on the last side that's, running a stock engine, go ahead, send it. No, I'm just kidding.
He's going to be a customer then.
That's right. Exactly. It comes full circle, It's kind of like the guy that, that runs the windshield repair and also, drives a rock truck in the daytime.
Right.
Absolutely.
Exactly. But what I'm hearing though, Cass, is there are similarities to what we're familiar with, and then there are some differences that you kind of put. The torture chamber that is the combustion chamber is a little more intense in environment, but ultimately the basics like seal it off, keep the fuel and oil apart, those aspects are the same.
Yeah, it is. It's very there's a lot of similarity there. Some of the things that we find is a reentrant versus a non-reentrant bowl. Let's see. Cummins has really learned a lot about combustion bowls, and they flip-flopped. They had the early combustion bowl of anything from the 12 valve to. They kept experimenting with these bowls. All right, and let's just don't use anything but the ISP engine, or at least let's narrow it down and say in a pickup truck, because there's a lot of different forms that we could go there. But if you look at the piston design, they use a reentrant bowl. Then they went to 124 degree spray pattern, and then they wound up changing to 143 degree spray pattern and use a non-reentrant piston. And what wound up happening is again, we were talking about that ringland issue. Anybody that's had 04.5 to 07 Cummins and had engine failure, most of the time you'll notice that the rings on the top are just gone. They'll generally break a ring. And again, a lot of that has to do with going back to what you and I were talking about, Keith, with the washout and the ringland wear and the rings breaking because this thing's now just kind of rocking in its ringland. But it is important that there's proper seal there. But it also, emissions are a lot of the reasons for the reentrant style bowl, and it's trying to force the oxygen back to the center of the cylinder, and that's great. But then also that does present a problem. We see it like LMLs, and we see it a lot in the Duramax side, and we see it a lot in the 6.4s where they start cracking pistons because that lip that's on the bowl, like a 224-3666 part number, is a piston from a Ford Power Stroke 6.4, whereas a Max 4.7 is a 3851 part number. It uses it's the International's version of that, but that lip on that bowl was a lot broader. So if they didn't crack and they didn't have those problems that the 6.4 Power Stroke piston did, but they didn't meet the same emission standards either. But what happens is if you could do a profile view, it's kind of like a teardrop shape as the gases go down in the bowl and they circle back around and kind of like do a 270. And when they do, that causes a lot longer, it causes for the heat to dwell in the pocket of that piston area, and it'll eventually, people always say, my piston's cracked. The truth be known is the piston doesn't ever actually crack. What it does is it torches it and puts a tiny pinhole in it. And when that happens, it acts like a watermelon on a hot July day, and it just pops open, and that crack, it becomes a pressure point as the piston's coming up. The pressure, goes through that tiny pinhole, it expands, and then it just literally makes a crack like across a windshield. And the next thing you know about the guys calling saying, hey, I don't know why, but I cannot keep glow plug harnesses in this engine, and he never dawns on him that, hey, I've got crankcase pressure out the, yang. And this, but that's kind of the typical event that it takes place anyway.
It sounds like, Cass, you've got obviously a tremendous amount of knowledge about the about the combustion event and what's going on in this thing, which is, we'll say for those people that don't know you, the way we know you, it speaks volume. I mean, just you deep dive this stuff like nobody else that I know. We'll say it's always fun to be around Cass and talk about this stuff. But where I was going next was, now the stuff that you do, we keep, you think of diesel, in today's world, we're always thinking of, light, I'll call it light to medium duty, pickup trucks type stuff. But do you dive into the larger engines? Because you had also mentioned about diving into the smaller engines. And have you worked on a lot of, we'll say the more, the big stuff, the heavy duty stuff?
Yeah, so we'll take it up to about class 4. And from there, the market is just there's so much to do where we're at. I mean, there's nowhere in the world yet. Now, that being said, okay, so the place we came from was an 8,000 square foot facility building. It was tiny, and I built on it 4 times in 4 years, and this has been several years back. But here's of recent, we moved from 8,000 square feet to 155,000 square feet.
Wow.
And we were able to purchase the building, the facility that we're in moved to that, it's like 9.5 acres. We went from 18 people to now 34, 35 people. So we were just overwhelmed, and still are, with the industry that we're in. I think there's just enough meat there that we haven't really pursued, the C15 and some of, going even further into, the heavy iron, we call it. But that's something that we've considered. But there are so many facets. It's amazing how far you can go in this industry, and how many opportunities that there are in our industry. So I don't know if I'll ever get into the over the road stuff. We do machine work sometimes for those engines, but what we're known for, I don't want to get outside of too much of what I want to be. Really, really good at something, but not okay at a lot of things, and try to focus that. And I have a tendency as a business owner and as a guy that just loves engines and is just curious and likes to know as much as he can about as many different things. My wife will tell you I'll drive her nuts because I'll stay up at night and just watch instructional video until she's just, go in the other room. I'm sick of it. But I mean, I'm over there going, man, in 1932, this is how they were building it. Look at it. And she's asleep. I'm shaking her. Look, but to me, it's fascinating. I love it. It's cool. But now the big stuff, we are not as well known for. And like I said, I don't have any intentions in the near future of pursuing that market.
Let's stay on that, and let's stay on the personal stuff, Keith, if I might, because I think it's interesting. And Cass, I know you play guitar, you're a musician, you're into a lot of stuff, so you're like a well-rounded guy, kind of like a Renaissance guy. How did this, except for diesel engines, of course, how did this start for you? Like, where did this all come from? Were you always mechanically inclined kid? Like, how did you get to this place where you are?
All right, so I grew up. My dad could not, and I love him to death, but the man could not screw in a light bulb if his life depended on it. My mother was changing the oil when she was expecting. And my dad would hold a flashlight for her. He had no clue what in the world. He couldn't do anything with that. And my brother used to say, look, I would tell him, I said, look, I was a little kid. I said, teach me how to change the weed eater cord. And he said, stay stupid. They'll quit asking you to do stuff. And I mean, I couldn't, and I couldn't help myself. But there was an older guy across the street that he would fix four-wheelers and stuff. Back in the day, it was three-wheelers. And anyways, I would hang out with him, boat motors and stuff. We had a little Honda 185, and I wanted to learn how to rebuild the engine so bad I couldn't stand it. And my uncle, who was like Sling Blade, he was in an accident when he was 20 years old. But he was just known in Mississippi for small engine repair. But I promise you, he was just like Karloff Sling Blade. I mean, just everything about him was but he was great at fixing small engines. And my grandmother passed away, and he moved up here, and I hung out with him. He taught me how to lap valves on his kitchen table because that was the way he was. There was nothing sacred like, you go into a woman's house and, oh, you don't do that. Take your shoes off. Not him. He was like, we'll build the engine right here in front of the floor. Just move the couch out of the way. That's just the way he was. But anyway, so I got into my dad was in appliance. He was in the appliance business, but he paid a guy to fix appliances. And my brother learned how to work on appliances from another gentleman. And he came back, and he was 16, 17, and I was 10. I can tell you this much. I was 10 years old. There's 3 half-inch bolts in the bottom of a GE washing machine. I could break them loose, but I didn't have the strength to pull the basket out by myself. So I would have to get them to come over and pull the basket out so I could fix the washer. And I remember doing that when I was 10. But I was just always inquisitive of how something works. It was just amazing to me. And I grew up in later we moved it out to a farm. And anyways, watching stuff like that. And we would deliver, my folks had a furniture and appliance store, so when I would drive around with my brother delivering furniture, I wasn't old enough to drive, but we deliver furniture, and I'd say, hey, pull over there. They got a go-kart out in the front yard. So he'd pull over, and I'd knock on the door, and here I am, 11, 12-year-old kid, knock on the door, and we had a little white Bell South truck. And I would buy the go-kart that was just sitting out, because I'm riding around, take it back to the house and tinker with it and get it running. play with it for, whatever time of year it was. And then if it was near Christmas time or whatever, I'd sell it and have some money. But I was always asking older men. Like when we went to church, there was a guy, he was real good. He worked at the small engine place, and I would get to be buddies with him. And the great thing about, it's not just this industry, but older people, typically they want to share the knowledge that they possess. And I was just they would always take a liking to me because, look, can I cut your front yard? I mean, I don't care if it were, I wanted to learn how to do something. Can I cut your grass? Can I weed eat? Can I do whatever? If you'll just teach me how to do this. And they were always really willing to teach me, and I would learn, so it kind of went and progressed that way. And I grew up, had a good understanding of schematics from my appliance days. And after I learned how to read, there's certain basic things that really will help you as a technician. And one of them is just the simple, learning how to read schematics and how those things, how that kind of works. And I got into buying and selling trailers, and I was going down to Texas. And when I went down there, I noticed everybody has a diesel truck and a ranch hand bumper. It's like it's prerequisite to being a Texan. It's like, welcome to Texas. Here's your diesel truck. Here's your ranch hand bumper. I mean, everybody has it. So while I was down there, I noticed, man, if I'm buying all these trailers, why don't I just buy trucks? And I'll put the trucks on the trailers, I'll drive them back, and I'll figure out how to fix them. And a friend of mine went to NADC. He dropped out, and I bought all his books from him. And so I started working on the stuff on the side. And I wound up going from there, and 2008 hit. Everything tanked. I was doing light-duty stuff. I was doing, injectors, clutches. I wasn't to the point of doing what we do now as far as in depth in it. But after that, my truck broke. After I got married, I prayed about a diesel truck. I needed a diesel truck. And this was shortly after 2010, I guess it was, something like that. But anyways, when my truck broke, I called a buddy of mine, and it was going to need extensive work. And he told me, hey, it's going to be this much. And I said, if I pay you, I'll never stop paying. I guess I'm just going to try to figure it out on my own. So I did. And then as soon as I got done doing that, a buddy of mine called me and said, hey, you fixed your truck. My dad, he's taken his truck to 5 different shops. You think you could fix it? And I've never been one to say no on anything. I was like, sure, yeah, I can do that. And I'm going over there with a voltmeter, and that's the only thing I've got to diagnose the thing. I don't have a scan tool. All I had was a voltmeter and a wiring schematic. And it was tough, but I did it, and I got it figured out. And anyways, that kind of put me out. I realized, hey, I need to make money. I got married. I got to provide. I got to do something. So it was always, never say no, and keep your hands moving and your ears open.
Wow. Keith, wow. This guy's impressive.
Oh, absolutely. It's we'll just say it's always fun to sit down to dinner with Cass. It's his background's kind of similar to mine, and it's that drive to want to learn, to want to know, and to take the classes. I remember my days, coming up, drafting classes, electronics classes, everything I could take, everything I could do, because it all comes, like Cass said, being able to sit down and read a schematic and know, hey, it starts at point A, it ends in point B. There's a problem somewhere between here and here. To have that and the same experience as, growing up that, hey, you got to dive in and learn this stuff and figure it out. It's great to be around like-minded persons in this industry. It's always an honor and a privilege to just say, he said, talk to the older guys and absorb that information. I'm over here absorbing everything that I can get out of Cass, because he's the expert in this field, and I'm we'll say I'm learning quickly, and I appreciate that. One question for you, Cass. When we're working on these engines, whether it's gas engine, diesel engine, they all have a design compromise. And what I mean by that is, of course, price to produce the part, emissions, power. There's always that compromise, and you're always fixing that, tweaking that. The block's not strong enough, so we've got to deck it or have an aftermarket block made, better head, better. Have you, is it in you? And I'm sure it is. It's to design a clean sheet of paper. Knowing all the good things, all the bad things, designing a head, designing the piston, designing the whole thing, clean sheet. Where are you at on that, or is that even a dream?
Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, who wouldn't? Who, you can't be a gearhead and with a machine shop and not have some projects in the works. So we're definitely working on. The kicker is there's certain parts of it that it depends on how deep you want to go, because designing billet blocks that are strictly for race and strictly a race application, that's one thing. There's always a casting issue for a wet block, so it's limitations there. We're working on some cylinder heads for race application. We're working on a lot of parts that we have designed parts in the past that would fix the problems. As far as a completely clean sheet, we're working on a project right now that is going to be strictly, it'll be a strictly race application. Unfortunately, the limitation of castings and things like that are going to be for an individual use, a daily driver type thing. It's just not there because there's just no way to machine some of this stuff without having casting. But there's definitely some things in the work for the Ford guys, and that's a big market for us. So we're working hard on that right now, and you take many things that Ford's done in the past. They kind of did that with the 6.7, where they took things that they liked about the 6.0s and 6.4s and things they liked about some of the gasoline stuff, and they kind of just like a hodgepodge, and they just put it all together. And that was pretty cool to see. There's a lot of bolt-on stuff, though, that we can still work off of a really good platform with some of the things that we're working on. Even take the very best of the, say, for instance, like the 6.4s or the 6.7s. Find the issues that they've got, because people aren't going to be able to buy for a daily driver something that they're using every day. They may not be able to afford a clean sheet, and us to completely redesign everything. But we were able to hit the areas of failure. 6.7s, the huge issues of starvation for oil. We've been able to address those. But anyways, I kind of took the long way around the barn there. But as far as the racing world, the Ford stuff, I really don't want to put it out there just yet what we're working on, but we definitely have some things in the work, and I'm hoping the end of this year, first part of next year, I'd love to be able to release it for PRI.
A tease on Hidden Horsepower, presented by Total Seal. And if this episode doesn't get you to subscribe and write a review, I don't know what would. Cass, this has been amazing. I got one more question. Keith, get ready with one more question, and then I'm going to ask you about advice to the next generation, which, by the way, you really kind of already gave it, but maybe you could elaborate. But you had a great line about, listen and don't make a fuss and do your work, that kind of thing. Keep your hands busy. I forget exactly what you said, but it was great. But I want to ask you, just as someone who is interested in the potential curve of these engines, like clearly the potential curve, I don't know, it feels like we're still at kind of the beginning, right? I remember a time when diesels weren't even really a thing in pickup trucks, and now they're everywhere. And now seeing them go so fast, and you're making all kinds of parts and you're making a living, like how far along that potential curve do you think we are, as opposed to a standard V8 like you talked about, the Coyotes and the LSs and those engines that came out kind of advanced that, like, wow, all of a sudden they did something new and they got more potential to create power. What about with these diesels? How far along are we?
The limitation for the diesel, for the OE, is always going to be their niche and what they're designing everything around. We're seeing engines now that are making 450 horsepower, 910, 1,000 foot-pound torque, right out of the gate. Right, you could drive it off the lot today and make 1,000 pound-feet of torque. The compacted graphite iron is only better than what we had in the past. The materials, the limitations that we'd had before were always a material one. Nobody knows that better than Keith. Seeing that in the in the ring world. So we're seeing steel pistons that are coming from the factory. Steel pistons now. That's just unheard of. who'd have thought that 10 years ago? It's absolutely mandatory because we're seeing 36,000 pounds of rail pressure. So they're not going to do anything more than what they have to. Sometimes I feel like, but the reason why they're doing it now is because they have to, because it's such a competitive market. Like I said in the beginning, 28% now. That's what the growth margins were from last year when everything was, going under. The other thing that actually picked up too, and I'm not trying to sell diesel here, but the other thing that picked up too, one of the biggest markets that picked up last year was the camping market. Everybody's got a camper now because nobody wanted to stay at home. So yes. That being said, there are many, many, many more diesel versions of vehicles now than there have ever been, which has allowed for more research and more growth in those areas. I think that we're just seeing, honestly, I know that California is saying that by the year, 2030 or something, they're not going to allow diesels anymore. I think, to be honest with you, a lot of stuff that you're hearing out right now, it's just, I don't think I would put too much stock in it. I think that it sounds good when you say it, but the reality of it is it's just not possible. And Ford has invested and continued to invest in their platform, and I think they've pushed that thing just absolutely. It's incredible to see what they've done in the last 10 years with the 6.7. I see that the future of diesel is definitely a bright one.
Excellent. Keith, final question.
Well, I want a question and a comment. And one thing that Cass mentioned about the steel pistons that are out now, and because of rail pressures, the heat we're dealing with, the power outputs, we've started developing our HSS, high-speed steel top rings for the diesel application. We've had to push that ring so far. We're talking in the gas world. This is pro mod level stuff. To survive that world and to be able to handle the heat, the power output they have. It is that we've had to develop new material technologies, new coating technologies, because guys like Cass are pushing this technology, this engine technology so far. But the question for Cass, and this is kind of going back to, we'll say, your youth. What was the defining moment? Where was that divergence from a gas guy to a diesel guy? Because you get guys that race gas motors, they don't ever think about diesel. Diesel guys aren't racing gas stuff. So there was that thing. It was like, was it the farm? Was it the trip to Texas? When was it, or was it even a conscious thought that I'm not a gas performance guy, I'm a diesel performance guy. Would you say expand?
I don't know that anybody's ever asked me that question, and that's a really good question. I think my brother has passed away and he's gone on to the Lord, but in 2000, I'll remember, this goes to show you, it's funny, this goes to show you how people are so far removed from diesel. I remember going with him, and we were test driving. I had no clue back then anything about diesel. Salesmen, they will actually, this is the dumbest thing ever, but salesmen, we're sitting in a second gen body style at that time, like 99 or 2000. And anyways, the guy goes, yeah, this thing actually, these things come from the factory. There's a rod knock in them. I mean, of course, there's large things. It's like, what? Looking back, you're like, what are you smoking, man? This is like your first day on the job. Hello, well, whatever. But he's trying to sell us this truck. But, oh, yeah, Cummins is this, Cummins is that, We were clueless. But a friend of his that was actually in the appliance business, he had a 7.3, and he swore by 7.3. I mean, it was just, he's a typical 7.3 guy. I mean, there is no other diesel engine out there on the market, but he bought a new truck in 2000. And when he bought that truck, he always wanted a Chevrolet, always wanted that. And then 2001, they came out with the Duramax. And I was just enough because I always wanted it. I'm a younger brother. Everybody out there can relate to this. If you're a younger brother, you always want to one up your older brother simply because he's the guy to impress. It's not the kid down the street. It's not anybody else. It's not even your dad. It's your older brother. That's your in a weird way, that's kind of like, for me anyways, it's kind of like my father figure. But I always wanted to impress him. But I knew that he wanted a Duramax, and they came out with it the next year, right? So that was 2001 was the first year that they're actually putting the Duramax engine. And he was a Chevrolet guy, hardcore. So I went and I remember going and test driving the Duramax and bringing it to the house to show him, and I was just being kind of a little bit antagonistic because he was not a Ford guy by any stretch of imagination. But they didn't have it then. So once I got in that was life changing. I mean, once that introduced me to the diesel world, and I mean, I was hooked. And there was no such thing as any other engine at that point in time. It has to be diesel. So I guess that's what did it.
Amazing. He's Cass Choate from ChoatePerformance.com, Choate Engineering Performance. Cass, we always ask everybody, there's another generation of people coming up. They're out there. They're interested. Maybe they realize that they're mechanical. We hear about the next generation, and our listeners, they seem to be very hot on all of this. So what advice would you give them how to go from where they are to where they want to be?
Stay low, stay humble. And if you know an older guy that knows a whole lot, see if he needs his grass cut. I think that's kind of the best advice that I guess I could give. Just people like to help humble people. Nobody really likes a prideful person. And if you can stay low and keep your mouth closed, ears open, and be willing to put in the for lack of a better term, the sweat equity. I think that's the best advice that I could give to the younger generation. Whether a guy succeeds or he fails, typically it's going to be directly related to his willingness to work. So when opportunity does not, by some uncanny quirk, it often goes unnoticed. It so resembles work.
Wow. Excellent advice. Keith, how great was this?
Absolutely fantastic, Cass. I got to tell you, words to live by what you just said. And like I said, if I was there right now, I would shake your hand, brother.
Well, I look forward to seeing you soon. And, man, I greatly appreciate y'all having me on.
Oh, it was fantastic. I know this is going to be a very popular episode. I really appreciate you, and you've got an enthusiasm and an ability to communicate. And to me, what's great is that, relatively new in your endeavor, right? You're not one of these people who have been around a long time, and you've had rapid, extreme growth, and you're innovating, and you're doing new things, and you're willing to share your knowledge, and that is all great stuff, and that's why you were on Hidden Horsepower. Cass, thank you so much. Good luck with Choate Engineering Performance, and I hope to see you at the next Engine Performance Expo, and we'll have some more good times. Thank you for coming on Hidden Horsepower.
I'm looking forward to it, fellas. Thank y'all again. If you need anything, you got my number. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Cass.
Cass Choate with us here on Hidden Horsepower. Keith, my goodness, my head is spinning. I don't know what was better, the information about the diesels or the motivation that we got.
Yeah, Cass is just, one of those great individuals that's driven. He's intelligent. He communicates extremely well. For anybody that's looking for work to be done that's in his ballpark, I couldn't recommend anybody else more highly. He is an absolutely fantastic guy and a great soul.
So for our audience, who I would imagine, because Cass is on, the diesel crowd out there, in addition to our normal Hidden Horsepower listeners, all you diesel folks out there, subscribe, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, SoundCloud. We're going to do this again, but I think there's some things to learn from our previous and future guests as well, and you will enjoy the show. But what about Total Seal? What can you do for the diesel folks out there?
Oh, we've got a lineup for just about every engine Cass just mentioned. From the small little Kubota diesel tractors that are out there to the big over the road jobs. We do rings for everything. In between all the late model 6.4, 6.7s. The old 7.3, 6.2s, Duramaxes. As Cass mentioned, one of the biggest challenges with these is keeping the fuel out of the oil. Take away faster starting. Builds more cylinder pressure faster, all the things the gapless ring done. If you're just looking at one thing, it just simply eliminates fuel dilution. We have so many customers that have gone to the ring just simply for that fact. They go to change the oil, guess what? Still looks like oil. It's an amazing reduction in contamination in the bottom end. And it's an inexpensive, simple upgrade. Doesn't take any special tools, just a matter of putting the gapless ring on it, and down the road you go.
Just like that. So where should they call? What should they do if they want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, give us a holler at the 800-874-2753. All of us here can help you out. You can go to the website, totalseal.com. You can simply look up your vehicle on there for the complete set of rings. You can buy just the gapless rings. If you've recently purchased a kit that came with everything, you can buy just the gapless ring. You don't have to get the complete ring set. We can simply upgrade you into that gapless part. So we definitely have a way to help you bring that diesel to the next level, whether it be an everyday driver, as Cass mentioned, in the camper, in the tow truck, or if you're a weekend drag race guy, pulling truck guy, we've got a gapless ring for you.
Keith, excellent job. Another episode in the book. Super exciting. Everybody's busy. Everybody's moving. You're burning up down there at over 110 degrees down there in Arizona. I'm just super excited about what lies ahead. Thank you again for another great episode.
Thank you, Joe. I appreciate it.
He's Keith Jones, the Director of Technical Sales for Total Seal. I'm Joe Costello. You can follow me on Twitter and on Instagram at WFO Joe. And I do a podcast called WFO Radio, and I'm out there on the NHRA Drag Racing Tour. Hope to see you at a drag race somewhere down the road. You know that Matt Hartford, he's doing pretty well as well. We'll see you on the next episode of Hidden Horsepower, presented by Total Seal.